Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast Record Club, where each week one of us picks an album for everyone to listen to, and then we review it. And this week, we are talking, of course, about Morgan's recommended record, which is Fiona Apple. Good job, Jake. Already starting off well. Fiona Papple. Her album, When the Pawn Hits the Conflicts, He Thinks Like a King. What he knows throws the blows when he goes to the fight, and he'll win the whole thing, for he enters the ring. There's no body to batter when your mind is your might. So when you go solo, you hold your own hand and remember that depth is the greatest of heights. And if you know where you stand, then you'll know where to land. And if you fall, it won't matter because you'll know that you're right.
I genuinely
is a fun fact. I was looking for title trivia for the quiz that we were recording in the same session. One of the questions that I didn't end up using for that section was, what is the longest album title of all time? And surprisingly enough, it is not this.
Yeah, I read about this while doing.
Released an album that was like one word longer just to have it.
Well, Chumbawamba, I was reading about this because I'm pretty sure it's mentioned. I don't know if it's mentioned on the Wikipedia page. I definitely read about this somewhere while prepping for this, which is that, the Chumbawamba album is like 85 words or something.
Jesus Christ.
Anyway. Oh yeah, I was going to say congratulations. I genuinely felt like a pang of like pride, like fatherly pride, when you got through that title without making a single flub or like stutter.
Riley might pay them, father.
No, genuinely, it was an emotional moment because you're overcoming a thing you're known for, which is fucking up the titles of our podcast, and you're
overcoming a thing which you are known for, that being blowing it.
You have a speech impediment. Get off my podcast.
No, like it was beautiful. Yes, so we are here talking about Fiona Apple's When the Pawn, because fate would have it, we're actually recording this and it will be going up around about a couple of days out from the time where her fourth album, The Idler Wheel, is Wiser Than the Turner of the Screw and the something about whipping cords. That album turns 10 this weekend. But of course, because we are messy bitches, we're not celebrating. Fuck that album. It's only my second favorite Fiona Apple record. We're going to talk instead about her second album, which Jake has stated the title of earlier in the video. I'll put a timestamp for the title drop in the description. And this album is, it's not Fiona Apple's breakthrough record, because that was unquestionably 1996's title, her debut, one of the most distinctive and kind of like fully formed rival debuts of any sort of singer-songwriter in the 1990s, certainly following in the stead of an artist like Tori Amos. And it's no coincidence, I don't think, that Fiona gets a lot of Tori Amos comparisons, even worked with and works here with the same session drummer as Tori. Of course, I don't feel like cheap making that comparison, because if anything, Fiona's a more well-known and sort of kind of culturally vital artist at the moment than Tori. And yet Tori preceded Fiona, and as I talked about in our record club on Little Earthquakes, which is one of my favorite debut albums of all time, laid out a blueprint almost that feels like it's kind of been somewhat forgotten compared to artists like Fiona and, say, I don't know, Alanis Morissette, Liz Phair, all artists who followed in the stead of that. But Fiona herself deserves credit for being one of the most distinctive and idiosyncratic and, I would say, musically adventurous artists in that whole mode. She's typically thought of as the kind of like, sad piano balladess, but really her music has a lot of weight to it, a lot of complexity to it. Her lyricism is incredibly literate and kind of poetic and difficult to unpack at certain points. There's a lot more going on in Fiona's records than I think that she often gets credit for. And When the Pawn, I think, which is my favorite Fiona Apple record, I'm pretty confident it's Morgan's favorite Fiona Apple record. I'm sure we'll find out very soon what Jake thinks. It is in many ways, I think, the record that maybe best encompasses all of Fiona's strengths. Although the recent Fetch the Bolt Cutters, which of course was probably the most talked about album of 2020, certainly does that in its own way as well. But this is really kind of Fiona's masterpiece, in my opinion. This is kind of Fiona's most concise and refined set of songs. Absolutely nothing even remotely approaching an inessential cut here, but also, aside from Fetch the Bolt Cutters, I suppose, that kind of superseded this, it's Fiona's most muscular sounding record too. It is a collaboration with the legendary composer and producer of many an ornate pop record or soundtrack in this era, John Brian. And I
didn't even know that, but the second you said it, I was
Brioche.
Like, oh, fuck. Yeah, that's definitely him.
Yeah, and so
John Brioche bun.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it feels like the blueprint essentially for many singer-songwriters that have come in Fiona's wake, and even kind of just superseding and running circles around some of the highest cultural moments of singer-songwriter female artists who've preceded Fiona as well. And it's a really special, fantastic record, and it is very much gotten its own shine more and more as the years grew on. If you can believe this, it was actually critically generally considered a letdown following Tidal when it was initially released. But the way in which these things go, people have swung back around, and now it's one of her most beloved records. So yeah, Morgan, this was your record club pick. Why don't you talk a little bit about what the album means to you, why you think it's an important record, and what the whole thing is all about here?
This is sort of a confluence of very important people of that time, both in the music industry and outside of it, with John Bryan's contributions to the sound of the album, and the fact that all of the music videos for this album were directed by none other than Paul Thomas Anderson, and each video is iconic in its own right. It's just sort of this cultural moment in my mind, at least. And it's also just like 5 best albums of the 90s. I don't know.
Certainly in terms of singer-songwriter records, I feel like this is like a gold standard sort of thing. And what's interesting to think about it, as I mentioned, like how there was a bit of a frosty reception to this initially. One of the things that, from critics anyway, and one of the things that strikes me thinking about this, because like the thing with Fiona is that she came to fame and prominence at a very young age, right? So she found success when she was a teenager. I'm pretty sure that Tidal was, if not released, then definitely recorded when she was a teenager. 16, I think, maybe. She was very young when she composed.
I think it was like 19.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think some of those songs were definitely written when she was a teenager, but she was kind of she was in the public eye, and she had a certain prominence from a very young age. And also, it being the late 90s, the era of the Lewinsky scandal, among many other, bits of regrettable culture. It was an era in which, not necessarily particularly so, but to me, it seems an era where women were particularly objectified within like popular culture. It was kind of a beginning stage in pop culture of women, of successful female artists kind of beginning to reassert a certain sexual energy and agency in their art. Like it was kind of not the first time that it happened, but it was kind of the beginning of a new wave where that was starting to become more and more prominent in popular culture. And it was very much a response to how kind of frosty and difficult and culturally hegemonically masculine pop culture was in the early 90s, right? It was so like, not only was it dominated by men, but it was also like this hyper masculine sort of landscape in terms of music and film and culture. And so you had this kind of reaction to that among female artists who were starting to see more and more mainstream success. And certainly Fiona Apple was never like a chart-topping artist in terms of her mainstream appeal. But the thing with Tidal is that that's a record that when it was released, was kind of held up by a sort of male establishment of music criticism as this kind of like, wunderkind album, where this kind of like child prodigy has come of age and is gifting us this sort of sensual, insight into her emotions and stuff. And it was like the way that album was viewed sort of culturally, it was, again, a time where music journalism was very heavily male dominated. And the way that, just in terms of cultural discourse, Fiona was talked about, like she was heavily sexualized. I think about the music video to a song like Criminal. Like, that's a very sort of iconic music video where Fiona is kind of presenting herself in a kind of vulnerable state, but of course it being Fiona sort of wielding a sort of subversive power in that. But she was viewed, I think, through a kind of unsavory lens as this kind of object that was often leered at. And that was justified by a lot of, male establishment critics through the guise of, oh, well, she's a great artist who's inviting us to do this, right? Who is kind of, leading us on. That was a lot of the cultural discourse around Tidal. And I think it's important to establish, because one of the defining characteristics of When the Pawn is, I think, Fiona responding to that perception of herself. This is an incredibly biting and kind of visceral album. This is an album where Fiona, and she doesn't go down the route of like turning herself into this like, complete 180 heel turn femme fatale type figure. She just presents herself in a much more uglier and realistic and sort of brutal way as this, person, I'm sure a reflection of what she was going through in her own life, but a person who is as easily manipulated and taken advantage of by men as she is, clueless and helpless to be able to have a healthy relationship a lot of the time because of things that she can't control, and sometimes things that she can control, and aspects of the way she is. It's a record that's equally self-effacing and just brutally scathing towards the people and the men in her life who sort of take advantage of her, or who view her through a particularly condescending lens. Obviously, we're three male presenting people, so we're not especially qualified to comment in much detail on that experience, but it's something that Fiona really embodies and I think of as one of the sort of thematic core elements of this record. It's a messy album. It's an album where she will be lashing out at some, hypocritical man in one, song, and then the very next moment she could be just completely falling apart and just criticizing herself in the most kind of brutal way. And in that way, it feels so emotionally complicated and so representative of this portrait of an incredibly traumatized and lost person who is trying to figure shit out, and is also not trying to be defined entirely by the ways in which she's been taken advantage of in the past. So yeah, it's a big, complex melting pot of feminine emotions and energy and experiences, and it is one of the things that makes this such a charged album. Like, when you listen to this, it's got this heaviness to it, in terms of the subject matter, in terms of how propulsive it is, in terms of how biting and just kind of like direct the writing is. But also, one of the things that makes it a great record is that is complemented by the sound of it. It's an incredibly percussive record. One of the things that Fiona has become known for, I think, but was a kind of a new thing for her with this album, was how percussively heavy her records could be. That's come to be kind of like a staple of her albums, but it really originated here with her collaboration with the legendary session drummer Matt Chamberlain, one-time member of Pearl Jam, drummer for Tori Amos and a number of fantastic singer-songwriters over the years. So yeah, that's the kind of record in a nutshell, right? As an overall thing, is it's this messy and emotionally complicated album that is thematically matched with this heavy, pulsing, fast-paced songwriting production style. Yeah, Morgan, what are some of the kind of moments on this record that really sort of leap out to you as properly representative of that.
Definitely the opening track, On the Bound, which is like, I mean, in terms of opening tracks that announce some sort of mission statement, I mean, it's like the piano has never been more of a percussion instrument than on this song. And the drums themselves, absolutely, they sound like they're being hit by a giant. It's amazing just in sound alone. Perhaps it's the best example of this on the album, but it certainly is not the last.
Mm.
I mean, it follows up immediately with To Your Love, which is in a similar, it's a lighter, faster headspace in terms of the percussion, but it loses almost none of its impact.
No, I mean, like, that's a song, one of the songs on the record that's really grown on me, particularly over the years, because it's so easy to get caught up in Fiona's sort of the way she kind of stretches her voice out and the way she sort of harmonizes with the sort of dissonant string tones on that song. But it is absolutely lightning in terms of the rhythm section. Like, that song is just completely going nutty. And when you really kind of like pay attention to the mixes and to everything that's sort of going on in these songs, it's really striking how seldom you ever get a moment of like simple straightforwardness on this record. There's always some kind of hectic collisions of players on this record coming together. And one of the things that Fiona said while sort of talking about the writing of the record was that essentially her process here was she would go away and write the songs on her piano and record the vocal lines and piano lines and stuff, and then she would in her words essentially surrender the songs to John Bryan and to Matt Chamberlain for John Bryan to kind of help with the string arrangements and the sort of like lusher sounds, and Matt Chamberlain to, you know, just go fucking bug nutty on the kit and stuff. And she wanted it to be a record where there's almost like a kind of sense of conflicting forces between Fiona and the music itself, which I think adds a sort of kineticism to the whole thing. Jake, I don't actually know how long you've had this record in your life, if you've only heard it for the first time this week, or what your thoughts are in general. I'd love to hear what your experiences was like listening to it this week, and where you sort of fall overall on this spectrum.
Well, I've had it in my life for a grand total of a week and a half. I feel like people, at least who pay attention to my musical taste or more aware of it, are probably find that somewhat surprising, just because Fiona seems to be an artist who caters to a lot of the sensibilities that I respond to, and like singer-songwriter, to classify her in the vaguest, broadest way possible. But I do have experience with her mainly because of Fetch the Bolt Cutters. That was an album that really sort of came to define a lot of the start of quarantine in 2020, just because it released at that perfect point and had like that, 10 from Pitchfork. So it was really dominating because it didn't have that much competition at the very beginning of the year. So I remember listening to that, and I feel like Fetch the Bolt Cutters is just a terrible place to start with her, because a lot of, I think, the appeal of that record is seeing the contrast of an artist at their most youthful and vibrant with their earlier career, and a sort of more seasoned, mature artist on Fetch the Bolt Cutters, which I think that album sort of held me at a distance for not having visited her older records, a thing I will rectify soon. So I liked that album, but it was just sort of strange. It never really hit me in the way that like a resonant piece of work would. I just kind of evaluated it and was like, yeah, this is good. It's good stuff. So I was, I guess, a bit tentative in approaching this, because I was just like, I don't know, maybe she's just not for me. Maybe this sort of like this is, I finally found the one artist like this who isn't particularly for me. Long story short, wrong, because I don't know what I expected this to sound like. But I definitely, like, just from her image, you sort of see her as like the predecessor to like the indie sad girl phenomenon that sort of came in later. So I figured that would be not a million miles away, maybe with a sprinkle of Tori Amos, because I know that they're talked about a lot similarly. And what I get instead is this, I guess you said Liz Phair. A lot of the energy that this album exudes is very Exile in Guyville. in the respect that you're seeing someone play with the fundamentals of music construction in a way that feels really adventurous for what is ostensibly conceptually a more simple album, but it's the emotionality and the sort of tenor of it that really kind of drives it home. I love the idea that, like, I didn't know that was how the record was made in sort of a collaborative trio of minds, but it definitely makes sense just because of how full the sound is here, which I didn't expect at all. I expected something more plaintive, something a bit more simple. This is Baroque, it's ornate, it's jazz-like in points like On the Bound. But I think the cool thing is that, like, we've been talking a lot about percussion, and honestly, a lot of the stuff on here reminds me, we talked about the guy who did it, and, he worked for Tori Amos and what have you. But Jake Core comparison here, the way percussion works in this album reminds me so much of early Tom Waits. Like, so much. Particularly his early stuff. I'd say that this and, say, The Heart of Saturday Night really don't have like that conflicting palettes, just because there is a lot of sort of jazziness to the songs here. But I think, other than the percussion being very present, very immediate, very impactful in a way you don't expect records like this to be, the main star of the show here, for as great of a collaboration, and John Bryan too, those strings that come in on the opening track are just, that's the good shit. But it's Fiona herself that remains the most compelling part of the record. Obviously, her writing and her performances are kind of where I think the most immediate things that people resonate with her music kind of leap out at you, particularly the vocal performances. My God, this bitch can sing. I know I probably sound a little bit late to that party, but like, I love the way, especially in On the Bound, which is one of my favorite songs on here. I love the way when she says the hook, the "you're all I need." She like growls that second part out. And I've never heard anyone do that before. It's like, it's really subtle, but like the way she kind of like resonates it with her vocal cords at the very beginning in the word "all" is just, that's what makes this album cool, is that every choice, be it from the instrumentation, be it from the vocals, every choice feels like it has a tangible, almost physical effect on the listener that make listening to this feel so distant from other records like it. Whenever I put this album on, I was so immediately immersed in a way I'm just not with other records. So needless to say, that this is an album of just nothing but perfect songs and near perfect songs. So I was pleasantly surprised to find out that not only do I like this, it's a masterpiece, maybe, I think. Bit she may have goated.
I think we need to talk at this point about the singles, the most iconic tracks to this record. The lead single, and probably the most sort of commercially enduring song on this record, is "Fast as You Can," which, like, I think I heard the song as a kid and maybe never really sort of processed who it was or who it was by. But this song, just the energy here is unbelievable. Like, this is, to me, like one of the most Fiona Apple songs. Like, the way that she kind of has this lyrical sort of glide to the way that she sings, like the part where she goes, "And I will not let you in." There's just so much of her singing
it's
style.
The greatest line delivery of all time.
Fiona
not
Apple
even close.
Manages to sing every single syllable like it rhymes with the next syllable coming without it actually rhyming. Like, I don't know what that means, but it's true.
Yeah. And she just has this way of like making, like, it's almost rapping the way that she sings in a certain way. Like, she just has this real sense of motion to the way that she sings on this song, like "Fast as you can, baby," and she just kind of puts a real beat on every syllable. And one of the best lines on the whole record as well, which is delivered beautifully, is when she's like, "My pretty mouth will frame the phrases that will disprove your faith in man." which is just like cold as hell. And it's the kind of like cold as hell bar that's like so.
Bitch is verbose as a motherfucker. I had to look up some words that are on this album because I didn't know what they meant.
She's like, at certain points, she's kind of like the Aesop Rock of like singer-songwriters. Because she'll just like throw some lines at you that are like both very verbose, but also said so fast that you have to play catch up. But also like she enunciates so clearly as well that it does hit. Everything that she says does register because she is so great at getting each word to kind of like land with an impact. It's a real talent that she has. And I think it's displayed amazingly on this song.
Once again, the sound of it so directly influences that. Again, the percussion itself, which is naturally faster than it is on any other point in the album. And it just has this wild, like barely contained propulsive energy to it. It's like a train that is almost going to go off the tracks always, but never does. It's just going that fast that it might go off at any point, but it doesn't.
Well, that's kind of the vibe as well. Like the whole song is about sort of being in a relationship where where the woman and the man in this case are sort of pitted against each other. They're kind of locked in battle emotionally and psychologically. And this is obviously from her perspective, and she's kind of like daring him and challenging him and threatening him and using words to do all of this, right? Like words are her weapon. And that whole thing has the feeling of like a carousel that's spinning out of control. And I think the way you described it, Morgamus, was absolutely perfect. Like it's got that, you know, scenes from a marriage energy or whatever, something like that, where there's just this fire and the sense of antagonism happening here. It's super cinematic, actually, in a lot of ways.
You could conceivably set like a Martin Scorsese movie montage to this song. Moves so fast.
Absolutely.
Vince Gilligan, you have been slacking.
And
please. Oh God.
It is far from the only song that excels at all of these things. The second single from this record is the song Limp, which is the third track on the album. Which is like, this song is like, I remember the first time I listened to this album, I remember hearing this song for the first time and just being like, what is happening? Because this song is, again, you have that speed that she is singing at, and it has some of my favorite sort of vocal melodies and runs on this, like the way that she delivers the chorus of when I think of it, my fingers turn to fists, and the way that she delivers the line, you beat me with your bitter lies, with a sense of real like weight, like it's actually the words are being used to beat someone over the head. And she's just running on and on so you can't catch up with you, and then she just ends with that like lying limp in your own hands, and it's just like this hard cut ending to the line, and then at the song at the end. And just like one of some lines on here that like if a romantic partner were to say these to me, I would simply never ever like pursue romance ever again. Lines like you fondle my trigger and then you blame my gun. Jesus, go off, queen.
I would hang myself in my fucking closet if someone said that to me.
You want to make me sick, you want to lick my wounds, don't you, baby? You want the badge of honor when you save my hide, but you're the one in the way of the day of doom, baby, if you need my shame to reclaim your pride.
How do you deliver a line that ridiculously verbose that A, is completely coherent in its meaning, and B, manage to sing it so fucking effortlessly? Like, I can't imagine, like, there's lots of singer-songwriters who, when they have their songs, it's like, you know, a lot of them are simple and elemental, and you're just kind of like, that's the simplicity and appeal of it. A lot of people could perform it, and that's what makes it special. Nobody could fucking do this other than Fiona Apple. Who the fuck is doing it like her? I don't think anyone.
Ain't, can't, won't, shouldn't.
Yeah. This is like the kind of energy that you either need to be really young, really mad, or like have a serious cocaine addiction to be able to do, or both potentially. But it's the kind of energy that is so, it's so hard to fake. Like and that's what makes the album so powerful, is the fire feels real all the time, and it feels like there's stakes to these songs and how they work out. Like it's you know, it's almost intimidating to listen to at points. Like, Jesus
it's like
Christ.
she recorded them in like the studio. Like she did one song a day, and right before each one, she like took an Adderall, fucking did a double shot of espresso, ran into the studio, was like, "Fuck, here's the song."
Yeah.
Just repeat that process for every single song on here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that fire, again, just to bring it back to what I was saying earlier, a lot of that fire, like, to me, it must come from like a certain antagonism towards the way she'd been treated in music media and in media in general. The just general attitudes to young women attempting to be artists in a sort of popular sort of cultural landscape. It is a very antagonistic record, and yet it never feels like one note in that antagonism, or like just overly bitter either. Like it's and I think a part of that comes back to how self-effacing Fiona herself can be. And nowhere is that better displayed than on my favorite Fiona Apple song, the third of 3 singles for this record, Paper Bag. This song is this is a perfect song. Like, and I don't just mean like, you know, one of the thousands of perfect songs that we all personally like. I mean, this is a perfect song. This is like one of the most emotional songs for me I could ever put on at any point. Like, we have talked about the fire and antagonism that Fiona embodies on lots of this record, but nowhere is that twisted inward more devastatingly than here. Although there's actually definitely one other track, and I know that Morgan and I are thinking of the same one, that's probably equally as devastating for the way that it sort of twists the knife inward. But here, for me, this is like the peak of Fiona at the peak of her powers. Like, this is a classic song to me. Just, I don't even know what to do. I could literally just read you. If I were to pick lyrics out to just exemplify this, I would have to just read the entire song. Like, the way that Fiona describes the feeling of realizing that, you know, there's only so much you can sort of assert your power to maintain control in a relationship dynamic before you realize ultimately that you're kind of powerless, that the person who you feel this incredible emotional connection to, because of that connection, there'll always be some extent to which you don't have control, and you're vulnerable, and you may be shunned, or you may have to come to terms with the fact that what you want is something you'll never really be able to get. The kind of relationship, the kind of thing you want from this person is something they'll never be able to give you. You might think it's a bird, but it's just a paper bag, as she says. Like, it's, I mean, it's a fucking masterpiece of a song.
It's like, it's not just the lyrics themselves, which you could read and you'd be like, well, this is the greatest thing that anybody's ever written. It is the way it's performed, where like every time she sings the chorus and the line "hunger hurts," it's like she sounds hungrier every time. Like,
yeah, again, the way she's, I want him so bad, oh, kills, because I know I'm a mess. I've sung along to this in the car, tears streaming down my face more than one time, like on multiple occasions. Hunger hurts, but starving works when it costs too much to love. Like, that's a Tombstone level lyric right there. Like, you put that shit on your grave. And Fiona has like a dozen of them on this album. Like,
honestly, like, both of you nailed down exactly why this song is great, is because it kind of renders you speechless the first couple times you hear it. So you can't really say anything cogent other than that's one of the best things I've ever heard. And then you kind of let it sit with you, and then you can sort of appreciate it. That's a bit more like I feel like you almost have to treat the instrumentation and vocals as two separate entities before you even reconcile how they go together. But thematically speaking, somebody like get a fucking sign or something. Jake comparison coming in is that down to the exact same metaphor, Paper Bag, it's almost the same song as Chinese Satellite. Same sentiment too. I mean, down to the looking at the stars and, you know, but it's actually something else. And you know what I mean? But it's a sentiment that Fiona obviously delivers in her own way, but something that I just relate to. I think that's the cool thing, is that this is so distinctly a multifaceted portrait of Fiona at this point in her life. Not just this song, but the whole album. Probably this song is probably the best example that I can think of. But it's sort of painting the portrait of somebody who is vulnerable from being hurt in the past, but also simultaneously trying to barrel towards the future as someone who displays both agency and almost an active resentment for her past self, that she's like overcompensating. So you just get the sense that like that frenetic energy that we talked about earlier that this album has works in concert with the theme, because it's Fiona constantly, like, it's like she's on a jog where she's going really fast and she's constantly turning over her shoulder to see if her past self is following her. And it just creates this sense of like mania almost. Even on more low-key songs like Paper Bag, it kind of feels as if it's like a break amidst the chaos. And you sort of get these moments where she kind of peels everything back. And it's just, especially sequencing wise, this is also another aspect of the record that I think is just nailed down basically perfectly, is that this is sequenced beautifully. It's not like the instrumentals run into each other or this is a whole thing. It's just that the energy, the palette, the themes, everything feels both simultaneously jarring and like it couldn't be any other way. Like if you did anything to this track list right now as it is, it would be worse. I can't explain how that's really the case, because that isn't always the case for even great albums. But this is something that, as delivered to you, if you changed it at all, it would crumple a bit. I mean, the songs are still great, so that helps. But still, I think that Paper Bag is sort of like the great centerpiece moment, that like the dead middle of the album where you kind of need a bit of a break almost from the intensity, even though the emotion just kind of comes and sucker punches you after the first couple of listens. But I mean, everybody's been talking about this song. I know that like Morgan has talked about this song for like however long you've had this album in your life, and so I just got to this with a lot of expectations. I was like, oh goddamn, they know what they're talking about. Jesus.
It's funny, like this album was actually only released on vinyl a couple of years ago for the first time, but like Paper Bag to me is like the ideal sort of like, you know, side A final track, like the ideal sort of, it couldn't be the end of the album, but it's like the perfect end of the first half, and then it kind of picks up with a mistake. But I thought, okay, we're trying to talk about the big hitters now. So I think maybe it might be cool to sort of just go around and talk about one or two of our favorite deep cuts, if they haven't been mentioned yet. Morgan, what songs jump out to you as like when you really dig into this record and get past the songs that sort of everyone knows, what are the tracks that really make this, you know, elevate the album as a whole?
Yeah, A Mistake is the following track is definitely like, this may be Brian's best work, at least on this album, of creating a particular soundscape, because the whole thing just kind of swirls around you for its entire runtime. And the guitars on here are like sickening.
Yeah, they've got that real ear-splitting quality to them.
One of the shining moments for lyrics as well, I think, even though the worst lyric on this album is about a million lesser artists' best by a mile. It's like, it's hard to pick a deeper cut, because it feels like picking a deep cut on Wish You Were Here or something. It's just like, like not everybody knows these songs, but it really feels like everybody should. The two penultimate tracks, The Way Things Are
Get
and
Gone.
Get Gone, especially, are like just.
Yeah, I was gonna bring
Yeah.
up The Way Things Are because that's low key one of my favorite songs on the record, and it's particularly because it has, I think, my favorite moment of the album. Or not. I mean, it's like 10, 15 seconds, so it's not really a moment, but it's like my favorite like bit in the album is in the bridge of the song, and it's both the sentiment she expresses and the way she sings it. When she sings, how can I fight when we're on the same side? How can I fight beside you? Like me reciting that cannot, I can't, you have to hear the way she sings that, right? It is the most pained and heartbroken vocal delivery. Like you may be able to think of other ones, but there's no more pained and more heartbroken vocal delivery that I can think of on any song than that. Like the way that she sings that is pure, just pain. And to me, it feels like maybe the most important moment of the entire album, or at least maybe one of the most emblematic, because what she's talking about, like that sentiment, how can I fight when we're on the same side? How can I fight beside you? That feels like the entire thesis of the album in a lot of ways, like distilled into one line, like the sense of, for the sake of your dignity and integrity, having to protect yourself and, you know, lashed out against people who try to diminish you and take you down, but also the conflict of that with the desire for self-preservation, which often means you have to play friendly with those people who are bringing you down, whether that's an unhealthy relationship partner or whether it's the music industry. Like it's this idea that we're on the same side in a certain sense, and that you have the thing that I want, the thing that I need, to bring it even back to On the Bound. But if I submit to you completely, then I lose a part of me that I don't want to lose, that, you know, would make me less than myself. And so there's this conflict between how do I keep that dignity and also survive? Because if I focus too much on preserving my integrity, then my career will just go down the drain, because no one will want to, produce my records, or, market my records, or, give my music, a voice. It's that idea that, that very feminist notion that you could quite easily become a pariah just for fully exerting yourself in the way that you're praised for doing, when it's not like, taking someone else down, like it's when it's taking down the abstract concept of a man as opposed to like an industry or whatever. So yeah, that to me is like the heart of the album, is that moment when she's just and the reason and the fact that she's delivering that line with such pain and power is so important to why I think it's so crucial, because it's like the whole thing is falling down around her and she doesn't know what to do. That is like emotional powerhouse moment. And one other track I'll also shout out as well, just a more underrated song, is from the first half, is Love Ridden as well. One of the more sort of haunting and sparse songs here. Like the string arrangement on this is astounding, and it is an absolutely gutting song. It's an absolutely gutting breakup song, essentially. If I need you, I'll just use your simple name. Like it's definitely one of the moments on the record where you get a bit of a reprieve from the intensity. And so maybe it registers less to most people than other moments on the record, but it's no less powerful. I mean, even just that title, Love Ridden, the idea that like, not love sick, not like hopelessly in love, but love ridden. Like this gives you the specific image of love as this like, adhesive, oily tar substance that's just kind of like you're coated in it and you can't get it off you, or like a viral infection or something. Like it's a very evocative sentiment, and it's a great, yeah, fuck, good shit.
Yeah. Morgan
Game
also
over,
mentioned
man.
one of the penultimate tracks, Get Gone, which is right now is my favorite song on the album.
Nice.
Just because this is like, it comes right after The Way Things Are, which I think what Riley was talking about, this sort of like builds directly off of the theme of that song coming right after it. And it's just sort of the how many times do I have to say to get away to get gone, flip your shit past another lass's humble dwelling. You got your game, made your shot, and you got away with a lot, but I'm not turned on. So put away that meat you're selling, which again, woo, that
the meat you're selling line in particular is like,
yeah, it's just like, I get away from him. I don't want him selling meat. But there's sort of a sense of like her just kind of throwing her cards on the table and just being like, look, being together is bad for the both of us at this point, so I'm walking the fuck away. But she still has sort of a lack of resolution. She doesn't know how to like deal with it. And that like there's this really complicated notion of moving away from someone who you've been with, but like knowing that they were in the wrong and that they didn't learn their lesson necessarily, that like they wronged you or did something awful to you or displayed like something in them that they need to work on. But and then you're leaving them for your own sake, but you're just like, but I feel like I almost left this person better than I found them. Or necessarily like, is this person going to go and do something else to someone else like they did with me? And you sort of have that, and it's just really frustrating. And like even from like a more self-centered point of view, you just kind of like, it bothers her, and by extension it kind of bothers you that the person in this song didn't realize that they fucked up. But then she also talks about how this like goes into her artistic process, kind of like she just talks about herself. She repeats, I'm singing, I'm not benefiting, instead I'm sitting, singing again, singing again, singing again. Like this is like a cyclical thing, and how she, artists like her, sort of use this as sort of fuel for the constant fire of their creativity, and how like you get a sense of real palpable exhaustion on this song. Like she's just fucking done with it. And that's really like a satisfying moment of like trying to get catharsis out of where there is none. And I think that's what makes her such a really dense like writer, and such a great like just like her writing is such a dense prose that like this is so like novelistic. It feels almost like it transcends medium. It just also happens to come with some of the best instrumentals ever made. And this whole album in like a macro sense actually reminds me of a record we've covered a long time ago on this podcast for a B-sides episode, and that's Laura Marling's I Was Once an Eagle, the album where she sort of takes the vulnerable first part of her career and then kind of doubles down on what she would do going forward, and like trying to embrace a sort of strength or persona that won't let her get hurt like she was in the past, but also creates an emotional distance in her present and potentially future self that she's constantly like at war with, and she tries to come to some kind of conclusion at the end. And on Laura's record, I think she does. Whereas I think Fiona on this album comes to a little bit more of a thornier, complicated conclusion, to where simultaneously she's able to make herself feel better, but there's still a part of her that's like remained with the people that have hurt her in the past, that she kind of just has to accept will forever remain with them, because they're not going, like there's nothing they can do to reconcile or make up for that fact, which is a really complicated and mature notion to even tackle, let alone master the way that she does.
Closing track, I Know. I mean, I'll start with my most immediate thoughts about the song, which are the closing line, which is just simply, it's okay, you don't have to say it, when the chorus and title of the song has been I Know. But the fact that it's okay, you don't have to say it, and then she doesn't say anything else, and the song wraps itself up, and that's the end of the album. And like the song itself closes like a fairly typical smoky lounge jazz song, and she somehow makes it sound like the first time that anyone's ever ended a song like that, just because of the emotion that you've experienced listening to the song. The most impactful line and delivery on this album to me will always be the "you can use my skin to bury secrets in," which is like the most fragile that she is on the album in a lot of ways. And for that relative restraint, it becomes the most powerful moment on it to me.
You know, you said that skin line. That actually, this whole song and a lot of points on this album kind of reminds me of the songwriting of who is, I think, right now my favorite lyricist of all time, which is Scott Hutchinson. He really went back to the mining of using physical, kind of almost body horror clunkiness to like emphasize like wounds and like a sort of synergy between an emotional damage and sort of physical deformity or a physical sort of like wound that gets described. And Fiona kind of comes back to that idea a couple times on this record specifically, but here I think the sort of secrets buried in your skin line, that's like pure Scott. And I just fucking
I can hear him
Fuck.
saying it too. You can use my skin to bury secrets. I can hear him saying it.
Not to say that this song is already perfect. It's a flawless way to close the album. It's one of the best songs on here. But if he ever covered this song, I would simply melt. I would have died.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. God, that. So it's a song. Right. So we've had a lot of songs on this record about Fiona being conflicted about the status of her relationship with someone else, whether that is a romantic relationship or otherwise. And this is a song that's kind of like the most like a short story that any song on the album gets, the most kind of tied to any sort of scenario. And it's one in which Fiona is the other woman, dating a man who is married and kind of reckoning with the position that puts her in. Like the fact that she's by definition playing second fiddle, but also like she acts as something that he needs in some way, because otherwise she wouldn't be there. And it's not a situation I've ever experienced, obviously, but like there's so much dimensionality to the emotions that she conveys about being in this situation here that it feels so real and vivid, and I feel like a kind of sense of personal pain as though I have experienced this too. It's both like resigned, but also like full of this kind of like wisdom that makes Fiona seem more powerful than she maybe really is in the situation. When she sings, when the crowd becomes your burden and you've early closed your curtain, I'll wait by the backstage door. Like the way she finds like the most simple but perfect metaphors that situate their, emotional situation within like a real tangible landscape. It puts images and scenes in your head. Again, it's super cinematic, and it's definitely like no surprise that she found such a kinship in Paul Thomas Anderson around this time, because you can see movie scenes in your head when you listen to songs like this. And yeah, I think it's powerful, like Morgan, exactly what you said, the way that throughout the song, the motif of the title, that I'll know that when you're not there, when you can't say it, I'll know. And then the choice to then not use that reassurance at the end of the song, but instead to say, you don't need to say it, as opposed to I know. Like it's almost as if like it ends the song on this note of ambiguity, like perhaps for the first time her faith in being able to read him, or in like feeling as though she matters to him, is not fully there. There's cracks in it. It's undermined slightly. And in that one moment at the very end of the song, she goes from being this figure who's found this kind of agency and security in the situation to just completely unraveling, or at least like the beginning of a complete unraveling. And it's beautiful at the context of this as well, the whole verse. While you try to find the lines to speak your mind and pry it open, hoping for an encore, again, using this consistent like stage theatrical metaphor that carries through the song. And if it gets too late for me to wait for you to find you, Sorry, let me say it again. And if it gets too late for me to wait for you to find you love me and tell me so, it's okay. You don't need to say it. Like I love how I just tripped over it trying to deliver it. It's such a run-on line, as though she's kind of like, it's convoluted, like the situation is, and like her emotions are, and like the unraveling of her confidence in, being able to read where they're at emotionally in their relationship. It's a perfect song, like Paper Bag. It's absolutely up there. It's the fact any record that has a song as good as Paper Bag on it, like one song that good, is a record that is, deserves to be in a pantheon. But if you have two songs that good, you're cheating. You're like, you need to hire a bodyguard because you are too valuable to lose. As silly, as stupid as that sounds.
You have the Krabby Patty secret formula.
Yeah, exactly. You are, you're more valuable than, I don't know, unobtainium. Favorite tracks and ratings.
3 favorite tracks gotta be Get Gone, I Know, and On the Bound. Least favorite track, 9.5. Do with that what you will.
What I will do is write it in our spreadsheet. My 3 favorite tracks are
as a 10.
My 3 favorite tracks are Paper Bag, or as I like to think of it, Do You Ever Feel Like a Paper Bag Floating Through the Wind? Something else, whatever is next in the line. When Jake earlier, when you
think of another
Katy Perry song.
Jake earlier when you said like that the song down to the same like metaphor or literary device reminded you of, like, immediately I went to Firework in my head. Bring it up. Anyway, so Paper Bag, I Know for sure. Those are the 2 god tier tracks, but right behind them for me is The Way Things Are. No least favorite, and this is a hearty 10 out of 10 from me. Morgan.
Yeah, my 3 favorites, I Know and Paper Bag. I can't not pick On the Bound, and this is naturally a 10.
So that means overall we have an average rating of 9.8 for Fiona Apple's second album.
Sophomore effort.
All right, let us know at home what you think of Fiona Apple's sophomore effort. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your opinions. Where does it rank in the Fiona Apple discography to you? Do you think, like us, that it is the fucking peak? Or do you think that it's maybe a little bit overrated? Whatever your take is.
Or are you wrong and bad?
Empirically, provably incorrect.
Let us know in the comments below. Regardless, we do like to see all of your comments, no matter what the tone of them is, because it always helps us. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you're listening on Apple or on Spotify, you can head on over to the video version of this episode by following the link in the description. Give us a like there. If you want to support us, that would help a lot. If you enjoy what we do and you want to support us even more directly and become one of our besties, you can hit the join button for just $1 a month. Just $1 a month. And you will get your name featured in the title crawl of every video on this channel. Plus, you'll get priority comment response. Plus, you'll get cool emojis of our faces to type with in the comments. Plus, if you want to recommend us a record to listen to, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. As always, though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, supreme, world famous.